Being recorded.
All right, boys, we're recording. Great to see you. We got Giacomo, we got Leo, and we got Mechanic, and we're going to talk a bit about what's been going on in the world of. Well, actually, Lauren, you need to ask this first question. I don't want to steal. I don't want to steal this from you, and of course, this is going to put the boys to the test here because they've got to answer the question to as they would to a 13-year-old. So why don't you go ahead?
What is an ordinal?
Are you taking it, mechanic, or I go?
Go for it.
Okay. It's a mathematical concept which is very interesting as opposed to cardinals. So it's just counting. And in the field of Bitcoin is the rediscovery of a very old idea. This old idea that started in 2012 was the idea that you can actually assign a number like a serial number to each single Satoshi in Bitcoin. So Bitcoin as a system doesn't have an identity for Satoshis. Satoshis individually don't exist in the Bitcoin system. You just have UTXOs, so basically coins that you can spend, and each coin has a value. The value is denominated in Satoshi, but Satoshis disappear as soon as you spend the UTXO, and other new Satoshis appear in the output of the transaction. So there is no relation. So some people in 2012 said, what if we make up a scheme to say that if we have a transaction, the first Satoshi spent in the first output, we pretend is the same of this first Satoshi in the first, in the first input, we pretend is the same as the first in the first output. This is a make-believe scheme. It's just like you have gold. You cannot really track gold from one point to the other because gold atoms are all the same. But you can say, let's pretend that the atom of gold of the first gold bullion that exits this building will be the same as the first atom of gold of the first bullion entering the building over one day. It's totally arbitrary. We can make up thousands or millions of these schemes. And somebody proposed to use this scheme, this game, to basically make some Satoshis distinct from the others, unfungible, non-fungible, not equal to the others. Why would you do something like that? Well, the idea was we do something like that in order to track, to use Bitcoin to track things that are not Bitcoin. For example, we can track property rights, I don't know, bonus points, shares, stocks, voting rights, whatever. Uh, People proposed this idea, but this idea was considered bad in 2012 for many reasons, but mostly for three reasons. First reason is privacy. Even if a small number of people uses the scheme, if some people use the scheme, the privacy of everybody will degrade because you will add we call it an heuristics. You will add a suspicion that somebody from the outside watching a transaction, they may say, oh, this is probably the change, this is probably the payment, these inputs are probably from the same person. And if you have this kind of scheme and people will believe it, privacy will go down for everybody. The second point is called, in the shitcoin world, is called MEV, miner extracted value. The idea is that if miners are only paid by Bitcoin, the model of incentives is pretty simple. You can understand it. If they start to be paying not with the Bitcoins, but with the value of the collectible associated of a single Satoshi, then you can have very crazy incentive mishaps like we do see in shitcoins. You can have front running, you can have a lot of problems. Let's imagine that Apple, that has a capitalization which is more than Bitcoin right now, will issue the Apple stores, the Apple stocks on top of Satoshis. Now you have a completely disconnection between the value of the system and the value of the things represented, and you may have heavy distortion and problems. The third problem is scalability. The idea is that Bitcoin as a blockchain requires every single node to download every single transaction of everybody else forever. This is a very bad scalability model. It's the only scalability model we have, so we have to keep it at least on chain, but we are trying to move everything off of this model. This idea of colored coins, of unfungible Satoshi, will put even more stress on the blockchain because you will have everything on chain and you will do more transactions, not just for the money, but now you will do transaction even for everything else. And consider that if 2.1 quadrillion satoshis may be enough for a few centuries to represent money, the monetary base. They are not enough to represent every single credit, every stock, every bond, every bonus, every right. They are not enough satoshis. Basically, you don't have enough space in divisibility either. So for this reason, in 2012, this idea was abandoned. But then, more recently, and we will talk about the specific date in this podcast, somebody rediscovered this idea. They rebranded with a new name. They call it Ordinals. They pretend that it was innovation. It was not. It was an old idea from 2012. And with the marketing of a new innovation, the idea was basically we discovered how to do tokens in Bitcoin. It's not a discovery. It's a bad old idea that was already dismissed for a very good reason. On top of that, since nobody was caring for ordinals, people started to think about inscriptions, which are a different thing. It's basically ordinals plus blockchain spam. So you put now you create you put an image of something, you encode it on the global consensus ledger that so that everybody will have to download it forever. That image forever. It's not like sending you an image. I send you an image via email. I'll upload it, you download it. Some nodes will just route the information in the internet and we're fine. In Bitcoin, it's not like that. In Bitcoin, I will upload this information and every Bitcoin node forever, even in year 3000, they will be forced to re-download it in order to validate the transactions of Bitcoin. So adding this kind of time chain spam together with the ordinal token scheme, they started to sell the content, the images, as NFT art with this crazy hype that was basically very strong in shitcoin in 2021. Now this hype is dying. You may remember there were like big company issues NFTs. Jack Dorsey's tweet as an NFT. Now everything is crashing down. Nobody cares anymore in the real world about NFTs. But there is a small wave of zombie hype that is getting back from the grave. Like, okay, NFTs are dead, but what if we do that on ordinals? So they're cooler because they're on Bitcoin. So that's basically the full story.
Lauren.
So what I understand from, well, other people are gonna go, but what I understand so far is basically Ordinal is a token or it helps tokens.
It's a scheme to have tokens. It's a scheme to make tokens on the layer 1 of Bitcoin. It's a bad one, but yes.
What are you thinking, Mechanic?
I don't know. I think I don't know.
Other than being utterly bored and tired of this whole situation.
Yeah, it does get draining. Like I'm pretty spent because I just did a long podcast with McCormack. I think I broke his record for the longest podcast he's ever done.
Mm-hmm.
And and you go into it and you're like, right, done and dusted. That's it. I've addressed everything. And then you open Twitter one morning and you're like, wow, this is just like the problem is people are making money off representing something or misrepresenting something. And they don't really try particularly hard. And Brandolini's law, is undefeated. The amount of effort it takes to defeat or counter bullshit is a lot is a lot more than the amount of effort required to create it. So people are like, this one argument that keeps coming up is you can't stop spam.
Mm-hmm.
And but the thing is, that's true in all contexts, not just Bitcoin.
I have a sticker on my letterbox that says no publications, please. And we don't get any of the flyers come around. So I stopped spam. So.
Sometimes.
Well, the point is, if you got less spam as a result of that, it was worth doing it, even if someone ignored it.
So this is an interesting point about the arguments. Actually, before we get into that, Lauren, any further questions that you wanted to ask the guys here?
No.
I
think I'm pretty excited to get into this.
Ordinal's bad, right?
Yeah.
And just stack your sats and yeah. Okay, good. No NFTs, none of that kind of nonsense.
I didn't even get into that in the first place. I don't want to do it anyways.
Good.
I mean, make up your mind freely, but they are bad.
Right. Okay.
Anyways, bye bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Speak soon.
Bye.
So yeah, right. So there's a website out there which a lot of plebs might not be aware of, and it's been brilliantly written and compiled, and it's called "What the Fuck Happened in Feb 2023." So if anybody, or WTF happened in Feb 2023. So if nobody's up to speed on WTF happened in 1971, go and look at that website first, because that's the OG website. But then come and get yourselves up to speed with WTF happened in 2023. And it's very, very important that. So, Mechanic, here's my take on the whole thing. Both you, Giacomo, and Leo here, and the other people that have been really beating the drum on this, I can imagine how tired you are of it. Battling these people with the monetary incentive behind them is almost impossible. But getting the education out there to the discerning pleb that might just have been completely ignoring this for the last, well, over a year, might just be coming to the party now and looking for the real information. And that's exactly what you guys are bringing. And, you know, Peter Rizzo was on the What Bitcoin Did podcast, and he had his side of things. So more education is getting out there, and you need both sides so you can make a critical thinking decision somewhere in the middle. But what I saw with this whole thing, when it first came out, well, first of all, if we back up, where did drive chains come into this before it led us into ordinals? Is there any? Is it?
There's some overlap, because drive chain represents a similar corruption of network, the balance of network incentives, but it's not the same thing. But it's reminiscent of some of the harm that's being done. Like ultimately, like highest level, you have to have some sort of argument for miners can make more money doing something that's harmful to Bitcoin, but they shouldn't. You have to be able to say they shouldn't. If you just resign entirely to the fact that people will always do what makes them the most amount of money in a short time frame, then you're screwed, because that's not how life works anyway. It's a sort of very naive ideological position. But specifically with this and in Bitcoin, we've had examples to the opposite, right? Like when Marapool said we'll be OFAC compliant, this sort of to carry on that naive position, you say, well, they won't be OFAC compliant because then they'll decline transactions that other people can mine, and they will lose revenue as a result. So they won't do this. This is painfully naive, because the reality is they probably got advised by their legal team, hey, if you voluntarily comply with OFAC, you can save millions of dollars in legal fees every year, and you're only going to be filtering out these transactions here, whilst, you know, undermining one of Bitcoin's critical qualities of censorship-resistant transactions. I say that very, very emphatically. So this is an important point to understand, because it's the difference between living in the real world and engaging in, you know, mental masturbation and discussing ideologies that bear no resemblance to reality. So when the community said, don't do this, they stopped. And this is not about money. This is about backlash. This is about appearance. This is about being forced to take the long-term position on something rather than just be stupid and disregard it. So you have to have a sort of more mature mentality than just playing this sort of sophistry. What do you call it? A sophistic approach. I don't know what that word would be, but just sort of making appeals to blind ideology and just saying, you know, miners can earn more money mining spam. Therefore, they will always do it. Therefore, there is nothing that can be done here. It's just incredibly lazy and disingenuous. It's not true. And I don't know, like there's a million branches from that sort of approach, the ideological approach of saying spam mitigation is wrong. I'm happy to go into each and every one of them. I should be getting more efficient at it by now, but I'm not. It always takes a long time to break this stuff down.
Did it feel to you as though the arguments came preloaded, Giacomo, or when this started really kind of ramping itself up?
I think that there are many arguments in one because, for example, if you compare this discussion about ordinals or inscription or spam with the discussion about drive chain, you will see that some commonalities are the ones that that Mechanic mentioned. So basically, this naive idea that we should maximize short-term profit as the only metric, which is crazy because the way to maximize profit short-term is basically to just go fiat. Because right now liquidity is on fiat. I mean, the best way, if you have a Bitcoin startup, the best way to maximize your profit right now is to close it down and become a central banker. But the point is that we want to change the state of the affairs in the world to have a maximization of utility in the long term with some ethical constraints, maybe, because we want to make the world better. Like if you cannot pay WikiLeaks with Visa, the maximization of your revenue is just stop caring and not donate to WikiLeaks. So the work doesn't work on pure maximization of profit only. There are many human action that are not based on immediate economical reward. Economical reward is great as a metric because it's very neutral, it's very objective, so it's useful for economic calculation. But we do while you help you feed your children, you are not paid for that, and you do it. There are many reasons to do it, even if you're not paid. So the first connection is that the naive idea that, oh, miners will make money, so they will just behave because they make money, which is stupid. But the second connection is the fact that some, not all, some of the spam defenders or the spam promoters are pushing very hard for consensus changes, and they're using the spam problem as some kind of quid pro quo kind of deal making or blackmail. It's like, oh, you see, I'm spamming the network. So in order to solve this problem long term, we need to change the consensus. There is some of that, and that is similar to the drive chain discussion, which is basically try to project a very gloomy and doomy picture of Bitcoin, like the typical shitcoin campaign. Bitcoin is dead, everything is over, sky is falling, so we need bigger blocks or B300 or whatever. We need whatever is the new shiny things, which is by chance is also my thing that my startup is working on. And we need these, otherwise Bitcoin is dead. There is some of that in the camp of, for example, covenant proposals. And I see some kind of contiguity. It will be unfair, though, to completely overlap these two debates, because, for example, me and Mechanic, we work together with Luke. Luke is super pro-covenant, but anti-spam. And there are many people that are, for example, I had some discussion with John Carvalho, is anti-covenant, absolutely, but mildly pro-spam. So it's not really a fair overlap. But there is some of that, like especially some of the trolls that started the spamming attack. So basically, Taproot Wizard, Bitcoin Magazine people, they are trying to try to ride the issue, the problem with the problem they are creating to people, high fees, lower confirmation times, faster block size increasing, because without spam you cannot get to 4 megabyte a block. Without spam you can maybe arrive to 2.5 megabyte for block. So blockchains are becoming heavier, UTXO set is becoming heavier. So they say, okay, we created this emergency, and now to escape the emergency we have to deploy the emergency solution, which is my cat opcode or whatever. Some of these people made clear that the real point is not the specific opcode, the specific change. I really like covenants as an idea, but as always, the point is not the technical change to Bitcoin, is who has the power to push the community into upgrading nodes, and who has the power to create this precedent and to use this precedent to show off power over the network. Jian Wu probably was against Segwit because of a covert ASIC boost, sure, but the real point was power. Was, can I really stop an upgrade, or New York Agreement, and Barry Silbert? Can I really decide an upgrade even if people are not convinced? So the spam situation, in some way, is different. like how can I say, like defeatism. So like there's nothing we can do. It's about laziness. It's about not wanting to take a position. It's about not fighting with friends, because for example, one of the major spam promoters is also personal friends of many current Bitcoin core developers. They hang out together from some kind of school in New York. So they're very close. They go to the same conference. They speak together. The CTO of Taproot Wizard is a personal friend of many Bitcoin core developers. So there are many angles to this debate. One of the angle, which is the one connected, I think, to Drive Chain, is trying to use an emergency to push an emergency in order to sell you the solution to the emergency, which is give me control over the consensus, basically.
Oh, is there any overlap between the people behind Drive Chain and the people behind Ordinals? So you've got like, it was mainly Paul, if I remember rightly, pushing BIP 300, and this Ordinals thing seems to be coming from Eric and Udi, seem to be like the spearhead of that, and goodness knows who else is behind them. But there's been one common kind of overlap, and that is the place that has been constantly shilled or constantly given column space.
From a funding point of view, ordinal spam and inscription and this kind of bullshit and the push for consensus change related to that are mostly pushed by Bitcoin Magazine people and Taproot Wizard, and they are sponsored by Satoshi Vision people, so Craig Wright friends, and they are sponsored by Ethereum people with Vitalik Buterin and Gavin Wood directly involved in Taproot Wizard. So the push for this kind of, let's say, I would call it an attack without being without being shy. So this attack is mostly funded by Ethereum and BSV people. The Drive Chain one, I think, like Paul had some connection back in the time with Garzik and other like big blockers. I don't remember exactly the hierarchy, but it seems a little bit different. I think that Bitcoin Magazine tended to promote the Drive Chain drama a few months ago because it was still playing in the same kind of idea that I mean, Bitcoin needs us. Bitcoin is sick. Bitcoin is going to die unless my influence can solve the problem, can fix the problem. Which, by the way, I will do some self-criticism. Maybe mechanics disagree. I think that we have the same risk in the anti-spam awareness camp. Some of us may go to the tangent to say Bitcoin is dead unless my own filtering proposition succeeds. And so we can also risk Bitcoin derangement syndrome. Like I had a cool idea for filtering, Bitcoin didn't accept it, so now I will basically rage quit my current style. So we also risk that, to be honest.
Well, let me jump on that.
I was gonna. You're not going to announce a rage quit, are you, Mechanic? Please, like not now.
No, I'll cover all that. Hopefully, I won't do what I always do, which is meander and forget the original point I was making. So yeah, that's a constant thing. I'm like, that I'm getting baited into doing, for one, and second off, you know, I think the way I would respond to it is, I think I framed it a certain way recently, which is the essential difference I want to talk about is what makes Bitcoin different from shitcoins, and I think it's a few arguments, and you can weight them differently. My primary one I'll hammer home about is just a culture that has a respect for the validators of everything, the nodes, the people that make the rule set distributed, or in the enforcement of the rule set being distributed. That's hugely important, and it doesn't exist in other chains, right? Like with your code is law Ethereum land, it just doesn't. Ironically, the Eric Wall, one of the Taproot wizards, he beautifully demonstrated how ridiculous it is trying to run a node in Ethereum. He did this thread that went on for months on Twitter where he got a souped up MacBook Pro and tried to sync to the Ethereum network in a sort of naive way that you would do if you were approaching it like it was another thing that had the same principles as the Bitcoin ecosystem. And you can't. You can't do it. The community has no interest in making that a priority. Verification of what goes on there, ability to trustlessly interact with the network, just is not a priority there. That's all part of a LARP. The idea that you can do that if you want, but we don't really care about it to the point where we make it possible. It shows what and reflects what the priority of the ecosystem is, and it's a polar opposite to what Bitcoin is, even though they're both blockchains and they're both on the internet and they're both theoretically decentralized. In order to be practically decentralized, you need to have it so that the enforcement of the rules does spread, widely. And Bitcoin is trending in the right direction. It started out really centralized and it got more and more decentralized. This is all great and it's all important and it's a part of the value set of what makes Bitcoin unique. And because Bitcoin is just a blockchain, like why isn't it Litecoin? Why isn't it Monero? Like, how is it different? It is the same technology, right? So it genuinely comes down to a set of values held by a community, and they've got to walk the walk when it comes to that. So that's why I say it's ironic, because this shitcoiner mentality, this influx of people that couldn't care less about nodes, are coming in and just dumping crap all over the nodes that the nodes don't want. And it's up to the nodes to assert themselves again by saying, look, here there's consensus rules, which is stuff that, this is the hard limit on what can and can't go into blocks. Then there's a softer limit, which is stuff that we don't tend to relay around the network because it's not stuff that's helpful to us. As a node, we're not interested in this stuff. So it's not going to make it to you as a miner. You might be able to make more money if you include it and find out about it some other way. But if you do that, you're disrespecting the ultimate parent and the ultimate authority of this network. And the fact that shitcoiners would come in and do that betrays their own priorities at best, or really is just an attack on what makes Bitcoin unique at worst. So when it comes to acknowledging this and fighting with a community that's losing its footing and its its values, it doesn't inspire a rage quit. Obviously, I'm very frustrated and it's very annoying for me to deal with, because the people that are making money off this will just gaslight everyone and pretend none of this is what it actually is, or that none of the mitigation we can do for it will work. But it's not like there's anything else remotely as good as Bitcoin. So I'm not going to Mike Hearn over it. I'm not going to quit if I don't get my way, because that wouldn't be a good precedent anyway. I think I have good arguments, and I think people are ultimately going to be convinced by what the anti-spam people or the pro-filter people are saying. And I think organically it will just improve. It's just a long grind, just like the block size war was. Like, you have to deal with bad arguments over and over and over again, and it gets very tiresome and frustrating. But eventually, every day I have more and more people saying, I didn't agree with you initially, but I do now. So and ultimately people, taking part in the scams that are what all this is in service of, get burnt and pissed off with it, and you do start to see real world manifestations of theoretical problems we've been talking about. So rage quit is off the table for me. It's just frustration dealing with this stuff. And it doesn't matter if we completely fail and the blockchain is 90% garbage and people are running way fewer nodes because the resource requirements for it are shooting up much faster than expected, and the incentive for doing it is a lot lower because, we transition to a community that treats running a node as a public obligation that you must do, and consequently no one does, rather than something you do for your own benefit, and that has been kept resource minimal as a requirement for people to do. No rage quitting from me, because there's nothing else remotely as good as Bitcoin, even if you end up in that awful scenario.
Yeah. Leo, when did you get kind of alerted to what was going on and decide that you wanted to kind of enter the conversation?
I was there when Luke released the first patch, and I was the first one to release it on Umbrella. And since I've tried to make Knot, the fork of Luke, available on much platform as possible. For now, it's available on Umbrella, on Start9 also, and on Homebrew for macOS, and I plan to release on other platform, just because a lot of people blindly trust the default of Bitcoin Core, and that's a problem because people need to understand what they do. Blindly run a node is not something good for Bitcoin. So I try to make my part in this and making Bitcoin not available on as much platform as possible.
Man, that's a very hard hitting point. Blindly running a node is not good for Bitcoin. How many of us out there listening to this are running a node and might not have even ever used it or interacted with it? I know there's a handful of people that are probably guilty of that. I followed the instructions that you guys had up on WTF happened in February 2023 of how to run. I have a my node running, so I ran Disrespector.
Yes,
Who
that was
wants
the original name.
that was yeah right okay do you want to explain then to people that are running a node blindly, might have set it up and just got over that first hurdle and like, oh my god, I did it, now I'm not going to touch it because I don't want it to break. That was me for the first few months. uh what do they need to do to upgrade to essentially not end up with these JPEGs and whatever else, as Giacomo was talking about earlier, clogging up your hardware?
Well, it wouldn't clog up your mempool, but it will clog up your block still, most likely until, something shifts in the community.
Sorry, to be even more accurate, you can also unclutter your blocks by selectively pruning after you validate it, but you still have to download it all. So the problem that you cannot get away from is downloading the crap after it's confirming the block.
So
What you
the
can do,
initial download, you
yeah,
will have it's everything's going to be in there, all of this
if you
crap.
want to be sovereign and to validate, you have to download the full chain, including the garbage. But
Yeah.
you can clean your mempool. You can clean other people mempool that you talk with. You can clean blocks that you produce or you help to produce if you point to a good mining pool, or if you use that yourself in solo mining, and you can prune your blocks. We still don't have good patches for that, but for example, another good patch will be I want to keep a full chain, because when you have a pruned node, you miss some things. You cannot run a block explorer. You have some problems with your market with Lightning. So a good patch would be a way to prune your chain only of garbage, but keeping the rest after you download it. Though you have to download it, unfortunately.
What about this argument that the anti-spammers throw out about, like, how long is it, or has it already happened, where you get some pretty bad images or pictures or data put in the blockchain, like let's use kiddie porn, that kind of stuff. Has that already happened, or is that a concern? And how do you
Yeah.
get that off your node? Like,
That's one of Luke's arguments. It's one of the positions in which I don't necessarily agree with him. Like, I think people can always upload bad data into the chain, and it's nasty for them to do that. I really don't want you using my hard drive to store, that, as you just said, the most disgusting thing a person can possibly do on this earth. I don't want visual evidence of that distributed and stored on tens of thousands of nodes. But I don't think it's not super relevant here, in my opinion, because this isn't like the problem is scale, and the problem is thresholds of adoption. Like what the wizards did and what other people did with the spam is they managed to raise enough money to make what's essentially an attack self-sustaining. You can't do that with horrible, like nasty trolls that like some lonely loser downstairs wants to, upload just filth into the chain. He's not going to go marketing and do something like that publicly and get mass adoption. The problem is the amount of it that's happening. I'm not worried about one-offs. Like you're going to get a one-off email from a psycho and it's not going to end up in your spam folder because it doesn't fit. Like spam is something that's generally, it takes on a certain characteristic, and you can look out for it and you can pick up on it based on a set of heuristics that you establish by learning how that kind of spam works. So the more a particular method of spam gets adopted, the more likely it is it's worth doing something about it. Whereas weird losers that want to do disgusting stuff, I don't think you counter that the same way, because it's not going to happen on a scale. They're not going to raise money from venture capitalists to do some horrible thing like that, right? So You know,
Imagine that
like
pitch.
it's much more horrible, but it's also
Maybe,
something.
maybe you're being optimistic about the current state of crypto venture capitalism, but at least for now, that's the case.
Yeah, right. I mean, I figured like the Clintons will use something that isn't the blockchain to do whatever they. I think that they'll use Hillary's server rather than the public blockchain because they want to be able to delete it, right?
Right, right.
So there's another trope here, and what's great about the website is it goes through all of the kind of like pushbacks. Satoshi inscribed on the chain, so I should be able to do it too, like a classic.
Yeah. So my point here is there is room for certain amounts of arbitrary data in Bitcoin. We've always taken a pragmatic approach to it. That's why it's always annoying arguing with bad ideologues because the pragmatic approach has always been, yeah, of course you can't completely stop spam. You relegate it, so you allow miners a certain amount of room in the block header, and you allow. We come up with op return as a way to say here is the least bad way people can store arbitrary data, so do it in here and here's how much space you're allowed to do it. We're not going to just give you unlimited space. Like this is in contrast to actual intended financial use case, right? If you want to do a transaction with hundreds of inputs and hundreds of outputs, that's going to take up a massive chunk of a block. You might approach taking up the entire block if you have enough inputs and outputs. No limitation on that I know of. I've seen transactions with hundreds of inputs, hundreds of outputs. They get relayed around the network, no problem. Whereas when Satoshi writes Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks, that's about as much space as he's got for that. If he wants to upload the entire article, today the Chancellor announced that he will be doing X. You can't do that. You can upload a hash of it because that will be much smaller, but you can't upload entire articles. Like you can now because people have found a way around the way we've designed the prevention of that. But again, this is something we've always taken active measures against.
Let me add a few things. I completely agree, but a few clarification. So first of all, Satoshi didn't inscribe in the sense that he didn't put the data encoding on top of some kind of NFT transmission scheme. And that makes all the difference because as Lex said, as Mechanic said, one thing is to dump data on the chain. And one thing is to be able to sell some kind of abstract ownership of that data into an NFT policy scheme. Without the latter, the former is something which is expensive and overall useless, and nobody does that at scale. I did it on an op return with the Eternity Wall when my daughter was born. Welcome, Amanda. I did it. I paid. It was just a romantic thing. It's nothing that people will do at a crazy level because there is no economical incentive. When you inscribe instead of just encoding, that's totally different. Satoshi never inscribed. He didn't sell a freaking NFT of that. Even recently, when Maddox, when basically this artist was mocking David
Madex.
Bailey, yeah, Maddox, sorry, was mocking David Bailey about well, you cannot buy my art, but I can email you a JPEG if you give me a Bitcoin. Bailey responded, yes, let's do that on a rare Satoshi. You see the difference that, and of course he said no, fuck you, and he didn't because he has integrity. But you see the difference. One thing is to write something on the chain, and one thing is to write it in a way that can be sold as an NFT policy scheme. It's completely different. Second difference, Satoshi did put that data not into an op return, but into the Coinbase field, which is very different because in the Coinbase field, you do have to write anyway to have extra entropy. So the reason many miners write the garbage, this kind of random character in the Coinbase is not because they want to preserve this random character forever. It's because the nonce field is limited. You need an extra nonce. Satoshi could have done only with the nonce field for that hash rate, but still it was already praxis to use the Coinbase in order to have entropy for the block. So that's a functional role. And third point, even more functional, the fact that putting this kind of very, very small extract of the newspaper. So as Mechanic said, not the full newspaper, but just this sentence was proof that Satoshi didn't pre-mine. So when Satoshi launched the system, he gave us proof that only from that day on he was actually mining and not before. So it was a proof of fairness, like, hey, look guys, even for this starting zero block that I cannot even take the profit from because it's unspendable, but even for this, I'm showing you that I'm not already running machines before. I started today because this is the newspaper of today. So there was a functional role, very limited inside the Coinbase entropy field, which is to be used anyway for entropy, and without an inscription, so without an NFT scam on top of the data encoding. So totally different.
Yeah, thanks. I described it as the block header. You're right. It's the nonce that they have to put this data in anyway, so it might as well be something like a headline. It's very elegant what Satoshi did, and it's reminiscent of his general approach that I keep sort of hammering home about, which is Satoshi didn't solve all the problems that theoretically can never be solved because they theoretically cannot be solved. He never solved the Byzantine generals problem. He never solved the spam problem. He didn't have a perfect launch because you can't get perfect launches. He just did as close as possible as you can get. He just took a practical approach to all these unsolvable problems while everyone scoffed at him. So this is not, well and understood enough. Like people said, some idiot on the mailing list thinks he solved the Byzantine generals problem. What an idiot. Doesn't he realize you can't solve that problem? But he didn't. He just said, here's a good enough workaround, and that is all we need. And people eventually sort of swallowed their pride and went, yeah, you're right. And that's exactly reminiscent of the spam situation, which is we're constantly coming up against people that say, you can't solve spam. I'm saying, yeah, I know. Spam is an unsolvable problem because you can never even define it objectively. It's all heuristic based. But you can do a pretty good job of making it 99% better, which is amazing. And it's just use your experience, look at the world around you. Other protocols that take exactly the same approach. Email is my favorite metaphor for it, or parallel. You have thousands of spam emails going around. You just rely on someone else to use a basic set of heuristics for getting rid of them and not cluttering up your life and leaving your inbox fairly clean. So occasionally a real email ends up in your spam folder and a spam email ends up in your inbox. Still way better than if we just said, hey, you can't solve spam. Let's just not do anything about it. Then you wouldn't be able to use email at all. It would be awful. And just the point everyone loves to make about these spam transactions being valid transactions is such an annoying and disingenuous point. It drives me crazy because spam emails are valid emails too. Spam is by definition always valid on whatever protocol you're using in a way in which it was not intended. Spam is valid, but it's not warranted. It's not desired by the recipients of it, and it's making their user experience worse. It's degrading what it is they're trying to do. And taking active measures against that as a service provider, which it makes sense to see mine as a service providers here, is the burden is on you to do that. Otherwise, you're degrading the experience for the users of the network. And if you do that, you're making it ultimately less usable and less desirable, and you're pushing people away from it. You're making it more expensive for them. That's very short-sighted to do that. I'll round off there.
No, it's
Well,
a good rant.
sorry if we keep continuing
Yes.
after each other, but this point by Mechanica, we made it elsewhere, but repetita juvant. So it's very, very important. First, spam is always valid in a protocol. There cannot be no spam which is invalid. So the argument is not spam because it's valid cannot be logically consistent. Second, but this cannot be spam because it's valuable for somebody. Spam is always valuable for somebody, namely the spammer. Otherwise, nobody would be spamming. So the point is just it's not valuable for the receiver, but the spammer will always be. And if you spam for a company, it's valuable for you as the spam provider and the company, which is the committer for the spammer. So it's just the victim that finds it unvaluable. So that's it. Spam cannot be spam if it costs money. That's absolutely not true. If you do phone call spams, your call center will cost a lot. The point is just that your cost must be less than the revenue they will get into whatever is your goal, which may be a DDoS attack against your enemy, or just or maybe just having fun, or maybe a commercial conversion over some kind of scam that you are promoting. So whatever is your goal in spam, usually the goal is adversarial, just taking down somebody, damaging you. That's also an economical goal. As long as your cost is below your profit, you do that. And in Bitcoin, Bitcoin is, somebody is confused because Bitcoin comes from an anti-spam solution, which is Hashcash, but unfortunately is different from Hashcash in that Bitcoin is a perfect spam platform, unfortunately, because in Bitcoin you pay one. So think about the call center. In the call center, you pay once for the setup of the call center, you pay your employee, and now you do the machine that calls automatically, and now the machine can call like, let's say 100 people, but then you have to recall again. So you have to maintain your cost in the call center to spam people. You get more than you pay, and that's why you do it, but it's still very expensive. While in Bitcoin, you pay 1 unit of block space once, one off, and then you are spamming all the future Bitcoin users forever. That's a conversion rate that no other system, like email spam, you set up your email server, but you have to keep running the email server to send email spam. In Bitcoin, you pay once, which you also do to set up an email server, and you will have targeted all Bitcoin users, all of them, forever automatically. So
That's a
these are
great
very
point.
important points.
It's a horrific reality to it. I mean, another inherent cost to spam is being forced to iterate all the time, because the service providers in any system try and stay one step ahead of you. So every time there's a new keyword that they use as part of their heuristics to not flood your inbox with spam, the people doing the spam have to not use that word anymore. They have to stay ahead. Like, email's particularly funny to use as an example, because if you just try and use email from a genuine perspective, but use it naively, setting up your own home server and trying to email the big data guys, a lot of time your email just won't even make it into people's inboxes, because it's such a closed system at this point, and it's so dysfunctional. But that being the case, you know, that tells you how hard it is for these spammers to have managed to get to the point where what they're sending can even end up in your junk folder rather than not show up at all. That just implies an even greater cost. So while this is, this is a funny argument to be making in this context, because I'm not saying make Bitcoin unusable for genuine users. I am just saying the argument that spam is free in other contexts, but Bitcoin comes with a pre-made solution for spam because it costs money to get into the blockchain. That's just not true. Spam is just not free in any context on any platform. It always costs money. Like Giacomo said, setting up a data center is expensive. Like I'm saying, iterating, staying one step ahead of the service providers, filtering this stuff, and even just coming up with a new way that people might fall for, right? Like they've fallen for the, hi, I'm from the Microsoft, like these people phoning you up, like, people start to get wise to it, and you have to train your staff a different way. There's always massive inherent cost to spamming people, or scamming as well, which we're talking spam and scams, they heavily overlap, and in this case it's both. But yeah, that's a horrifying point you make, Giacomo, about the fact that you pay that fee once and that's it. You get permanence. That spam is there forever, and you never have to re-up on that. There's no subscription fee. It's just there in the chain forever. So at least, I guess I'm saying what we're pushing for with these filters that people push back on us for. When I push for filters, they say, oh, the spammers can just iterate and do something else. And I'm like, yes, you have to make them do that because it raises the cost to what they do, and it's trivial for us to do it. You can keep updating your spam filters heuristically, not a problem. And this is where it gets really nasty, because they always say, no, you need to do it as a fork. And one of the spammers in chief wrote the fork for us. And I was like, I hope everyone understands what they're doing with this. They're trying to make it so that we can't do anything on a reasonable heuristic-based level and play a game of cat and mouse that's very winnable from our perspective, and a nightmare for the spammers. They want us to fork. They want us to change consensus rules every time these guys iterate. That puts all the burden on us. That means rewriting the email protocol to get rid of junk rather than just filtering it on a policy level as, Gmail or something like that. One's quick and cheap. and really annoying for spammers. One is expensive, sets awful precedents, and very slow and ineffective and cumbersome for the person trying to defend themselves. Whilst on the on the spammer side, laughable because they can watch for years as we come to terms on agreeing a new standard for getting rid of spam at the protocol level, and then they can just click a button the minute it gets merged into a new release of a node implementation software, and then they're ready with the next iteration of it. It's literally just giving up. So the fact that they tried to force us down that road, saying the only way you'll ever realistically get rid of this stuff is by forking. Here's your fork. It's a lie, and it's the wrong approach, and it couldn't be more disingenuous.
And there's a note here on the website, which is very, very important for people to understand. If you've not been down this rabbit hole, some may not already know this, but there has always been spam policy filters running on Bitcoin, even since the very first versions of Bitcoin software. These filters have always been improved over time, except since the Taproot update. So there's something happened here, and probably a lot of people aren't even really aware what Taproot is, myself included. That thing came and went for me. My head was in a different place. So can you like pretend Lauren was here again and just explain first of all, what's Taproot?
Can I take it?
Go ahead, man.
So Taproot is the merge of three very good ideas. One idea was called MUST, Merkleized abstract syntax tree. But basically, the idea is in Bitcoin smart contract, the first way to do it was to write all the condition on chain on the output of the transaction. So you may move your money only if these complex conditions are met. And you were writing the complex condition on chain. That was very bad for privacy, scalability, minor censorship, whatever you want, all usual problems. Now, when we move from this initial approach to what we call P2SH, pay to script hash, which is basically the address that start with 3 instead of 1, the new address starting with 3, we did something smarter. Instead of paying to the contract, to the complex condition, you pay to the hash of the condition, only the hash, the global. So you take all the complex condition, you hash it, and you pay to the hash. When you will have to spend it, only then you will reveal the full condition in the input. This is better for many reasons. First, until you spend, you save space on the blockchain. Second, privacy. Until you spend, you have good privacy. Third, the load will not go in the outputs, which is the UTXO set, which is very hard to maintain. It will go in the witness, which is easy to delete later. So this was a good evolution. But somebody said, why do we have to hash all the contract? Let's break the contract in the logical units, and we do a Merkle tree. So we do hash of the hash of the hash, and we reveal only the parts that we use. For example, I send money in a way that you, Daniel, and Mechanic can spend it together now, or Leo can spend it alone, but in 1 year. Instead of hashing everything, I will hash only one part, you and Mechanic now, and one other part, Leo, and then I will publish the hash of the hashes. When you spend, you will not publish the part of the contract you don't use. You only spend the part of the contract that you do use. So you save privacy, space, and it's great. That's one idea. The second idea is called Schnorr signature aggregation. Basically, with normal Bitcoin's cryptography, we can aggregate keys in the sense that if I add my private key to your private key, we have a private key, which is the private key of the sum of my public key plus your public key. But we cannot add signatures. If I take a message and I sign it with my key, and you take the same message and you sign it with your key, and we add the signatures, these are not valid signatures. But if we move to Schnorr, which is another signature scheme, we can aggregate signature. Why that's better? Because now, for example, if we can do it asynchronously. I can sign a transaction, I give you the signature, you create your signature, we add it together, and we have a valid signature. So instead of writing the contract for a 2 of 2 with Bitcoin script, we can do a 2 of 2, just summing up our signatures. So instead of my key, my public key, we put the sum of my public key plus your public key. And now if we want to spend, we have to sum my signature plus your signature. We can do it independently without trusting each other. So that is also great. And Greg Maxwell had an idea. So we can do must as a composition of contracts, and you reveal only the party that you need. But at the top level, you always assume something. Every complex contract with many, many parties always have a degenerate condition, a trivial condition, which is when we all agree. So let's say that we do a 2/15 plus 1 in the future. There is one condition which is always simple. We all agree to spend the money. So you do an aggregation of everybody and you put as basic condition that people will agree, and this address will be undistinguishable for a single signature. So you will not see that this is a double signature. You will not see anything. It just looks like a normal single sig, but inside there is a contract that in best case scenario represent the sum of all the signature. And in bad case scenario needs you to reveal only one small part. So if you think about that, for the future, for fee saving in the future of very high fees, and for privacy consideration, Taproot is amazing. So one of the things I actually dislike from about this debate about ordinals and inscription and filters is that some people are actually starting to connect Taproot with something bad that created spam. Absolutely not. Taproot is a brilliant idea to keep stuff outside of the blockchain. So with Taproot, you put fewer things on the blockchain. It's the other way around. What's happened is that together with Taproot and are related with Taproot, the same, basically, in order to move to Taproot, the spam filters that you used before, now you have to upgrade them to Taproot, basically. And core developers decided to not do, with a few exceptions, they decided not to upgrade them for many reasons that we may discuss. But Taproot was not the problem. Taproot doesn't incentivize spam. Taproot is a way to reduce load on the blockchain, increases privacy, increases scalability. It's just good. But together with Taproot, the filters has not been updated to the post Taproot basically script counting, but that's a completely orthogonal kind of thing. So it's not Taproot's fault. I think you're muted. You're still muted.
Yeah, sorry. The first question I'd have about that is then the concerns over Bitcoin Core. Where do you guys fall on that at the moment? Why did they not agree to update the filters if this was?
Yeah, I think this position on Core, I'm hesitant to, you know, cast aspersions on people, that have been working hard and done a good job for the most part. I disagree with the lack of decision to do anything. I'll frame it as rather than the decision to not do anything. I think it's just inexperience, youth, and lack of, people wanting to avoid controversy and drama, right? Like there's a very small, very loud group of people that are making a lot of money from this spam, and they are going to throw their weight in the ring in every single, medium of discussion around what happens in core development, whether it's, delving Bitcoin or Stacker News or, GitHub, obviously, or Twitter. And it's stressful. Like most of what Bitcoin Core are doing is housekeeping and just, keeping the thing ticking over whilst various operating systems upgrade and, various protocols upgrade. Like we need new Tor protocols and stuff like that. It's all got to keep working, right? Bitcoin needs to constantly just maintain where it's at. And it's nice to do your job in peace and quiet. It's not nice while you have people calling you a CIA agent on Twitter because they disagree with you, whether they're right or wrong. It's horrible. Like it's stressful. And to be honest, you are in that position. This is, trying to make money for humans work properly. Like it's a very important project and all of your decisions matter. So you are going to come under a lot of scrutiny. But I still empathize with the fact that you don't really want to wake up to, a billion notifications on Twitter about how you're a spook and, everyone calling you a bad actor. It's horrible. I've experienced it enough myself. So, yeah, I'm basically just going to put it down to, just just somewhat wanting to avoid drama and have a comfortable life. I think it's more that than sort of financial implications and compromises of that nature. Though, being completely honest, it can be that too. So, I don't know why. There are a bunch of reasons it can be, but it's a bunch of psychological conjecture that, is maybe fun to do, but is not super relevant. The point is they're just not doing it. Um, we've made a few pull requests. They've always been closed or locked temporarily, and then had sort of what do you call it? Random arbitrary hoop jumping requirements placed on us, like update data carrier size. Was our idea. Update data carrier size to include carrying of data as it happens now post Taproot. No, no, make a new variable. Don't call it data carrier size. Call it data. And I was going to make one called data carrier size 2, just to sort of be deliberately like, all right, if we have to play this game, let's play this game. And then that gets knacked by Gloria. And, this is pretty disappointing. I think Gloria is probably the main person that's sort of in a position here to either help us move forward with this or to block any progress. AJ Towns also said, why hasn't any progress been made? This was a suggestion made. Instead of updating data carrier size, make a second variable. I said it's confusing and redundant. Data carrier size is not op return size. It makes sense for data carrier size to include all kinds of data. Otherwise, it's really, really stupid. What the design of core would just look illogical and stupid and poorly thought out if we made a second variable. I used this analogy for it. It's like you're saying, I only want, people, entities or animals that are 4 feet or less entering this barn. So I'm going to make an entranceway that is only 4 feet high. And there is also a second door that's massive. I will pay no attention to the fact that that massive door is how they're all walking in, and I've got elephants walking in my barn and all that stuff. Let's pay no attention to that. Let's just get embroiled in a discussion around this variable around construction that's called door size, which is supposed to restrict the size of things that can get in this house. Let's make that 3 feet instead of 4 feet. And someone's saying, there's a second door. Can that door size thing also control how big the other door is? Because otherwise, all of the things that can't get through the little door will just go through the big door. And they say, oh no, make another thing, door size 2. You're saying, but they're both in service of the same intention, which is prevent things of a certain size or larger from getting in. Why don't we just make the door size variable control how big all the doors are? Why do we need to make one for each variable? Because if one is small and one is big, then everyone that's too big for the small one will just use the big one. Like it's such a stupid design, and I hope that's a reasonable analogy for it. Giacomo's probably got some embellishment you can offer there. Do you agree with that framing of the whole thing?
I don't think I can improve on that. It's a great analogy. It's perfect. It's very, very fun. I can only add that maybe it's not just laziness or fear of being controversial. There is a subset of famous and respected by me as well Bitcoin Core developers that have a technologically ideological position on that with some kind of sound reasoning. I will try to still man it. So Bitcoin started with Satoshi. Satoshi had a very, let's say, pro filter kind of attitude. He created anti-spam filter, but not just that. Not just that. Satoshi was also trusting nodes, generating nodes, so basically miners, a lot. One example, he implemented the first seen safe policy in the mempool. So the idea was, if your node sees a transaction that sees another transaction that will double spend that transaction in the mempool, your node will discard the second and keep save the first. This eventually created a problem of incentive compatibility in the sense that if the second transaction, the unsafe one, will pay the miner more, is to be expected that eventually the miners will use a new form they will change the program to not keep the first safe, but just to get the one that pays more, because it's in their economic interest to do it. So Satoshi was very, let's say, optimistic in hoping that the miners were actually taking the first. And now eventually there was a huge fight about full RBF, and I will not enter details, but the idea is that one position, which was the Satoshi's original position, is let's create a code that as a default will not do anything that can damage people. And the other position is, no, don't try to go against the short-term economic interest of the miners, because if you do, they will just play strange games and you will give a fake sense of safety. Another good example is, for example, Satoshi's first creation of the Lightning Network, basically Lightning Network channels, so payment channels by Satoshi. The idea was that every time you update the channel, Satoshi created channels as a code back in 2009. And the idea was every time you update, you bump up a number, like number one, version number two, version number three, and the miners will behave and they will always include the last version. The problem is that you cannot enforce this behavior. And so what you can expect is that miners will include the version that pays more and not the last version. So you can never know. So Satoshi started with this idea to give a lot of opinionated user-preserving rules to the mempool, as opposed to the consensus, while a group of people, starting especially one of the most famous and more OG is Peter Todd. Peter Todd, when he made his first post in 2010, the first post on Bitcoin Talk was about RBF, basically. And he kept saying for years, now this is, you cannot expect miners to save the first. Miners would just get the more money. So let's change the policy in a way that it goes closer and closer to the consensus. Miners will not violate the consensus because otherwise they lose money, but they will violate policies all the time. So let's not try to mitigate it, because in his opinion, this is just not elegant and will create other kind of problems. He's not alone. Other people, like more recently Ben Carman and others, but those people has a take that I find at least very consistent in itself. The take is, even if you can use mempool policy to do things, anti-spam, zero confirmation, safety, you shouldn't, because eventually you have to expect miners to maximize profit. So just go with that and try to move our mitigations elsewhere. So this is the way I will still manage it. So these people were proposing this, but Bitcoin Core never accepted this vision in this sense. Bitcoin Core always kept updating the spam filters. Up to some degree, they updated the RBF rule, and they were very conservative in keeping the policy distinct from the consensus. When Taproot came and this second big door was accidentally left completely open, when the first inputs arrived to close it, some developers decided not to do it because it was a discussion, it was controversial. But some developers were very happy about that, like Peter and Ben. They say, oh, that's great. This is the right direction. We should stop having a policy. We should only have consensus. This is an idea that if is not promoted with dishonesty, like why are you introducing filters to Bitcoin Core? That's dishonest, because that was the standard. Actually, you are trying to move away from the standard, so the burden of proof is on you to do something new. So if you don't say that that filters are new, and this kind of new idea is the default, because it's the opposite. If you don't say that filters are useless unless they are perfectly effective 100%, because that's not the case, as Mechanic explained, filters are, anti-spam is always a mouse and cat game, and always a effect of mitigation and increasing cost. So if you don't say these two things, or that mempool policies is censorship, because that's demented as a position. If you don't say these three things, but if you say, I think that the way that Bitcoin Core always managed policies in mempool is unproductive, it gets some benefit, but it also has some cost. And now you have to explain what is the cost. It's not very clear to me what will be the cost. But anyway, if you have this position, this is a position that I think can be respectable. The important thing is not to frame it in a gaslighting way. Is that so? Bitcoin Core always used policies to enforce stuff. And up to Taproot, yeah, sorry, go on, Mechanic.
No, you go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, well, up to Taproot, these policies included anti-spam. So if we want to remove that idea, that's a new concept, a new Bitcoin, where basically policy goes very close to consensus. It's not necessarily broken, but it's a very reckless new experiment. So some core developers are pushing in this direction for good, in good faith, because they think that's better. Some are just afraid of the controversy. Some are friends of the people weaponizing the new door, to scam people with NFTs. Unfortunately, that's also reality. Some Bitcoin Core developers are personally close to people working for Taproot Wizards. That's also a big component of it.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think like this is I wasn't aware of a lot of that history. It lines up with my worldview pretty well, so I'm happy. Obviously, I don't have any hard work to do there. But I'm wondering, Giacomo, and here's a genuine question, rather than me sort of, beating my own chest here and just sort of, posturing on my position here. This is something I'm genuinely curious about. Um, I'm going. I'm struggling to put it into words exactly. My position against what you alluded to Ben Carmen and Peter Todd there. With Peter Todd's come out with a Libra relay or free Libra relay. I forget what it's exactly called. And this idea seems to have emerged now. I don't know if this was around before or served as their justification for before for trying to make mempool policy just match consensus and go no further than that. My quarrel with it, firstly, is um, you don't why would you not indicate to miners in any capacity beyond consensus what you'd like and what you wouldn't like to go in the chain? And this idea that you can have it's going to be a problem if you do that because miners will simply route around you, to me, that it flips the understanding of what a node is and what a miner is to Bitcoin uh, into a it frames it as something I find just completely just so absurd, but it's not immediately obvious why I might think that, right? I can explain it like this. Like you have a relationship, an authority structure in Bitcoin, and the nodes are necessarily above the miners. It's the nodes that say whether your block is valid or not. It's the nodes that say, this is the current difficulty. You have to have met this, otherwise your block is not valid. Like that's the structure. That's the hierarchy of Bitcoin, and it has to be respected sort of as part of the fabric of what Bitcoin is. So if you're saying here's the consensus rules, miners, here's what we can strictly define without any sort of unintended consequences, and obviously the miners all meet that because they don't want to mine invalid blocks that will just get rejected universally. But it doesn't if you have that parental hierarchy, like in a way that's warranted, like Bitcoin is, and you're telling your kid, hey, you can't do this, you can't do that, and the kid says, all right, I'm going to meet all those rules, but I'm going to piss you off and do everything you don't want me to do that you can't strictly define. That doesn't work. That's not a functional relationship. The functional relationship is one where you just generally say, what is it the nodes are trying to do here? Let me work within those confines, even if the confines aren't necessarily definable in black and white. To sort of go, nodes have to flip around, and anything they can't strictly define, anything they would try and use mempool policy for rather than consensus, I can completely ignore and it doesn't matter because, hey, I met all your requirements. To me, that's sort of, delinquent behavior and something that is annoying and dysfunctional and something that when you grow up, you stop doing, right? And I still maintain that miners are not children and that if you indicate to them, hey, this stuff is undesirable. We are the masters of this network. We expect you to pay attention to us and adhere to kind of our guidance. I expect a mature ecosystem is one that says, yeah, that's important to do. And to me, I don't know if it was ever framed that way, Giacomo. I don't know if we ever discussed mempool policy as being something that deals with the gray area of what spam is and what spam isn't, is something that's more malleable than consensus, but it's just become this essential part of dealing with stuff like this. That if you abandon it as a process and say, hey, no, nodes must match consensus as closely as possible, otherwise miners will just root around. To me, that's really cowardly, and it's really upside down in an understanding of the network dynamic. I don't like it, and I don't think it's accurate either. And I think it's a resignation of, a similar misunderstanding of the David versus Goliath dynamic of this whole network. Like we've done it before, where people have just said, look, the miners don't want SegWit, so you're not getting SegWit. Like it's an obvious intuitive understanding of it, but it isn't reality. That's not how it works, and it obviously wasn't how it works because the miners like capitulated in the end. And while this isn't done with the same mechanism with forking, it's not another fork war like 2016, 2017. It's still it's still a power struggle between different incentives. And everyone's discussing minor incentives, and miners will include spam because they can make more money, but they're not the only contingent in this ecosystem. What matters to nodes is definitely more important. They're not paid, and I guess I'll finish this ramble here. The idea that miners are just an abusable public resource that must do a good job on behalf of the miners to get as much spam to them as possible. Otherwise, they will just root around. First off, it's misguided because if you're a private block template constructor, like a big mining pool is, you can always solicit out of band. You can always go around the mempool and ignore the nodes because you offer a unique service. You're able to guarantee people's data gets into a permanent database forever. You can offer that as a service, and it's being constructed all over the place. Marapool have already done it with Slipstream, and Mempool Space are doing a sort of more general purpose version of it that any mining pool can subscribe to. So they're basically killing the mempool voluntarily and just entrenching into our culture a new value of ignore the nodes. They're not going to do a good enough job for the miners anyway of getting us the spam we want to encumber them with forever. So we're going to seek it out of band. The network needs to go apeshit over this and say, what are you doing? You're service providers. You're supposed to do what you include in blocks is supposed to reflect what the nodes want in blocks. You're not supposed to just go and get money from anywhere you possibly can and encumber nodes with this crap forever. There is a cost to doing this stuff that is not being acknowledged. So, yeah, I'm asking Giacomo about how, if you disagree with some element of my perspective there, because for me, we've sort of had a happy status quo where you don't have 100 byte op returns because nodes were tacitly saying we don't approve of putting 100 byte op returns in the blockchain. So no miner said, hey, come, upload your 100 byte op returns to my API. It's fine. That never happened, right? What happened was spam came in that the nodes were accidentally stamping a seal of approval on because no one really paid attention to one of the byproducts of Taproot. And now, if nodes reassert themselves and say, "Oh, we're messing up, miners. We were accidentally giving you all this stuff we don't like. Here, we're telling you explicitly now that we don't like it." To me, a functional Bitcoin has a bunch of miners that say, "Oh, yeah, sorry, yeah, we'll stop putting that in." And the amount of money they can make putting it in is so negligible too, and the nature of what they're putting in being a scam, all that is just an insult to injury. The reality is it's just to be functional, miners need to go the extra mile and say, yeah, I'm not going to put this stuff in. The nodes don't like it. If I start pissing them off, eventually we just turn into, another shitcoin. And I call this whole thing hyper shitcoinization as a result of that. So yeah, I'm sorry I went all over the place there, Giacomo, but what
No, very clear.
do you think it's valid?
So I agree with you fundamentally, and that's why I am in the filterer camp, because I agree with you fundamentally. What I tried to do was to still man at least one version of the opposition to this, which is, I think, at least internally consistent. Let me try to use your example. You have a parent and you have the children. The children can misbehave, and the parent can stop them and punish them if they misbehave too much, if they go over some kind of behavior threshold. But there are some things that are harder to basically to control and to forbid and to ban effectively. For example, to give you another extreme, and it's not exactly that case, but just to give you an extreme, you cannot really influence your kid's thought. You cannot say, I forbid you from thinking that, because of ethical consideration, but also practically speaking, it's so impossible for you to detect and enforce any kind of thought police, that it's stupid to do it, because you have no power. So if you have no power, you best you should actually move to something that you can detect and enforce. So I'm not saying that mempool policy are exactly like that. You made a good case that they aren't, but we can see that in Bitcoin there are some degrees, like enforcing, so preventing miners from doing consensus invalid things is trivial. As long as we run nodes, we can always prevent them from doing that. Forcing miner to mine blocks that we like, but that are, for example, a WASP, I'm more skeptical that this power for the node will be reliable on the long term. I think that, and also not just reliable, but also always desirable. Because, for example, one thing is miners that can change the network, and one thing is miners that have veto power on changes. That's actually, for me, it's also, well, that's a very long parenthesis. But anyway, so preventing invalid blocks, easy. We can do it. We are in charge. We are the parents. Forcing to invalidate new blocks for a fork, maybe we can, maybe we cannot, maybe we shouldn't. I'm more skeptical. Forcing mempool policies, we can do that only in, let's say, best case scenarios and overall as a general trend. We can never do it individually, but we can do it overall. So I agree with you that we should do it, and I'm running Knots, and I will run Desert Spectre. So I agree with you, we should do it. But I think that the point, for example, let me give you the point which I think is stronger about RBF. About RBF, the idea is that if nodes will enforce as a mempool policy, first in safe, which is the old Satoshi idea, most of the times zero confirmation will be kind of safe, but every time you have an exception, that exception could be catastrophic if you rely on the rule. So the mempool rules can create this kind of perception of safety that can fail catastrophically, especially for the RBF. There are a lot of consequences in layer twos protocols like Lightning. So it's very hard to rely on something that is shaky in this foundation. So even filters, if we rely on mempools because we have the relationship, we are the parents, you miners are the children, just behave. But now we finally end up in an adversarial situation in which a nation state is printing money to buy hashing power to consistently attack Bitcoin with spam-filled block. And now they have a limited budget to do that. We will face a situation, which is not right now, where we are powerless. So I can appreciate some of the point of saying, let's not focus on the or the pragmatic temporary mitigation, but let's put most of the focus in very sound, long-term, powerful solution. The problem is that I think that in the pragmatical consideration, I can see this switch that you can basically fine-tune, and I think that Peter's and Ben position is wrong in this regard. I think that the old ways were better, specifically, but that's not an ideological thing. I understand why there is a theory of the opposite. The theory is give up. So basically, don't try to punish your children for stuff that are very, very difficult to enforce, but try to focus your punishment on stuff that are easy to, where you actually are in charge. With as a parental advice, it's not bad. Like don't try to don't fight the hard battles. Put a very few rules. Be very certain to be able to enforce those always effectively, and then leave more room for the rules where you're weaker. I think it's a consistent position. At least I disagree, and that's why I run Knots. But if promoted honestly, I don't find that idea completely inconsistent.
Thanks.
How many people in core at the moment? Like what are we talking right now?
Very difficult definition. There are people that are contributing to Bitcoin Core. Those are still in the hundreds, even in the last release. There are people, so basically people writing code. There are people that are writing this stuff, commenting other people's code like ACK, NAC, concept ACK, tested, untested. These people that don't just contribute, but also judge other people's contribution are a smaller group. I will say that there's like basically 15 maybe active users on GitHub doing that right now. I don't know mechanics if you think it's more, but not more than that. And then there are people with the possibility to commit changes on the GitHub repository. And those are basically 5 as of now, or like something like that. And then there are people that can kick out other people from the GitHub organization, and basically the administrator of the GitHub organization. And that's basically, as far as I know, that's basically 2. So it's core developers are potentially everybody, but when it comes to GitHub rules, the enforcement of Git and rules is pretty let's say thin as a pyramid of power.
Yeah, it's like on the inner area, it's like Falca, Fanquake, Gloria, AJ Towns, and who's the other guy? Can't remember. A Chow.
Yeah, yeah.
So, do we need more, or is this always going to be the way it is? Like,
Well,
I'm just trying to. What's
quality
the
is
thinking?
better than quantity. Like I will celebrate Vladimir, who was more outspoken about spam, and Jeff Garzik back when Jeff Garzik was sane. He was very outspoken about spam. Definitely, I will always mention this article in any discussion on this. Is the Op Return Wars by I think it's John Beer, the guy who wrote the block size wars. Like it's great. It goes into the history of this, and it's just the the take home from the whole thing is if you have core developers that are like, don't store this stuff on Bitcoin. It's not what it's for. Go away. What happens is the developers of the shitcoin or the spam coin protocols just go, how dare you? You're stifling innovation. I'm leaving. And then, they make this sort of sanctimonious exit. Well, they say, if you want to chase all the exciting new opportunities out of Bitcoin, you will lose ultimately. And we're saying that's fine. We're making perfect money. We're not doing silly experiments, uploading cat pictures or dick butts to the chain. I really, really think you're overstating your case when you're describing this stuff as, exciting experimentation when it's all just scams. But sure, go back to Ethereum, and they always do. So, like, thank you, Ethereum, for being the idiot container for so long. The fact that this culture is bleeding over into Bitcoin right now is not just it's not just bad aesthetically as people have tried to dismiss it. It's not that there's simply an aesthetic difference. Like if you take philosophy to that level and you're going to fall for that. Like as a core maintainer, as someone writing the protocol, someone that in that big of a responsibility, you cannot afford to just be empty head philosopher. You have to actually be practical in building a system that works, right? So, like I was thinking of this earlier when you have someone that wants to say that the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and some teenager graffitiing his name on the side of a train in the middle of London or something, trying to say they are philosophically the same thing is so annoying and empty-headed to me because yes, philosophically you're right, but on a practical level, if your worldview doesn't understand the difference between painting the Sistine Chapel and scribbling your name with a Sharpie on the side of a bus, then your philosophy isn't helpful. While it may be true, it's stupid. It doesn't, you're not holding space for great things to exist. You're just being obtuse. And I find that just annoying discussing stuff like that because obviously we all know there's a difference between the Sistine Chapel and graffiti. There is a difference. It's just philosophy. You can zoom out and out enough to the point where there isn't genuinely a difference. And I get that. But that's not if you're going to approach things like that, you're not going to make a usable protocol. You're just going to make something that adheres to a bunch of very, very deep philosophical principles that is useless to humanity as a functional store of value or as a medium of exchange. It just becomes unusable. Though you can pat yourself on the back about how consistent you are. And I feel like this is an area where we might disagree, Giacomo, because you always like to make sure everything is philosophically correct. I'm much more pragmatic.
And you're yes, we disagree on this, and I am very much tempted by the philosophical purity. But I have to agree with you that historically speaking, Satoshi was an example of pragmatism, and I mean, if I was if by a miracle in 2008 I was struck by lightning and able to code very well in C++ and have beautiful ideas, I would have fucked up and not created Bitcoin because of this theoretical purity. It made a lot of judgment calls, which is something I struggle with. If something is not philosophically perfect, I cannot recognize it. And Satoshi was able to do a lot of pragmatic judgment calls, which are the things keeping Bitcoin running. And for example, the position we were discussing before is very philosophical and very unpragmatic in a way. And that's also why I understand it better than you, because yeah, there is this difference. But to your point, Daniel, about we need more. It's not, yeah, it's really not about quantity. Like GitHub organization. It's basically the controller of the repository is Microsoft, ultimately. So what we need is to be less reliant of that kind of centralized organization for code progression and maintenance and evolution that we used for many years. It was fine until it lasted, but now it's probably, if it's not the bunch of core maintainers, it's about Microsoft taking over the repo if they want. They can kick out all the 4 people, 5 people we mentioned. They can be kicked out of GitHub. Of course, there is Git, which is the Git protocol, which is better. But the problem is that we're not really using Git. We're using GitHub because like all the issues, all the discussion, all the hack and knack are happening there. And when people goes to download Bitcoin Core, they are not really doing Git clone. Most of the users are not doing Git clone. They are actually doing GitHub. Well, they are doing, if they are doing Git clone, they do it from GitHub and not from some kind of other kind of distribution. So what we need is probably to move away. And I think that one thing will be technologies, incentives to do that. One thing will also be fragmentation of the code base. Instead of having, so when Satoshi created Bitcoin was one single code base doing everything: mining, wallet, node, networking, poker games, and everything. Then he started to strip out some parts. So when he published the functioning code, poker games and the centralized market were removed and just focus on the rest. Then mining was removed when people started to use ASICs and mining pools. Then wallets part is still there, but I don't even use Bitcoin Core as a wallet. Most people don't. And so we are stripping away the various part. So we arrive at the point in which maybe we may have the famous lib consensus. So this kind of software that just does a consensus rule is very important that we agree on that. But that's it. And if you want to maintain the rest, maybe you go like in the Linux ecosystem. You take this distro, this patch. This is very stressful for users. So this doesn't come at zero cost, because like normal Windows users or Apple users, when they try to use Linux, they suffer a lot, because they go from Apple basically spoon feeding you something to what the hell, what kind of distro, I don't know, everybody has an opinion, what kind of text editor, Vim, or what do I have to do? Too much choice. But Bitcoin is probably heading in that direction. There will be companies spoon feeding you some Bitcoin stack, but most of them will basically have one trace of Bitcoin Core that will be the consensus code. And I hoping that the mempool policy is now basically, so this debate may help people stopping to use Bitcoin Core for mempool policy. They still use it for consensus because that's very fragile, very dangerous to change. So let's stay there for consensus. But mempool, maybe not. Networking, of course, there is, again, Peter Todd's argument that everything is consensus. Like the consensus failure in 2017, 2013, was due to the fact that the database part, which is not consensus, was creating an involuntary soft fork about block size. And so we have to be very careful in this. But I think this is the way, as a Mandalorian will say.
Yeah, and I think maybe it bears commenting on Bitcoin Core it's super centralized. This is a spectrum, but that comes with a bunch of advantages. Like there was no core back in Satoshi's time, but there was still a centralized code base and a very small group of people that were responsible for what happened in it, with Satoshi himself being dictator of everything in it. And this is good because it meant you could fix things quickly if you needed to, and it's very efficient, and you have a very concise, strictly defined understanding of what the thing is and what it isn't. But of course, it's not good because it's fragile. So this is something I've spoken about with Giacomo loads, and it's great because I feel like I have this lovely, clear understanding of this stuff. You can either have efficient and centralized but fragile, or you can have decentralized, inefficient, but anti-fragile. So at the moment, Core is amazing because if we wanted to update the spam filters, Core have to be visionary on it again and say, all right, this is, nodes have no interest in relaying this stuff around. Why would they send it to miners? If miners want to disrespect it, then we have a problem. But definitely we should deal with the doors. There's a massive door that makes a mockery of the little door. Let's make the massive door the same size as the little door. Like it's just that. Otherwise, why do we even have anything around the size of the first door when there's a second door, right? So the fact is, Bitcoin Core being pretty centralized means if a few of those guys decide, yeah, we're going to do this, most of the network is just going to go in that direction because everyone just blindly runs Core by default, as you said at the beginning of the podcast. So, that means the filters get fixed. That means miners have a very good indication of what does and doesn't belong in the blockchain. Then we have a further conversation. Do Foundry, do Bitmain, what do these guys do? Do they carry on soliciting the spam out of band? Do they carry on including it? What's the result of that? I think I feel pretty good about our chances in that scenario. That's why I push for fixing the filters. But it is a leverage of the fact that we are much more centralized than we might otherwise be. If Core broke up, if there was like malice, like if you had Gavin Andreessen rather than writing himself out of the script, but becomes, malicious and starts pushing a Core client that has 20 megabyte blocks or whatever, and we didn't expel him from the community, then what naturally happens if Bitcoin is going to succeed overall, and it's just Core sort of dies, people stop having any respect for it. And then I don't welcome that scenario, even though that is more anti-fragile and it does get rid of an attack vector. Because, what happens if the 5 people, what happens if people that can control what gets merged to the Bitcoin Core GitHub are all CIA agents? Like, what happens in that scenario? I would love to know that Bitcoin as a community would pick up on that and reject the implementation entirely. But then we lose a valuable asset. We lose the ability to do some pretty controversial stuff that, needs to happen. But again, to comment further on the culture, when it comes specifically to spam fighting and historical precedent, BIP 148 that got us SegWit was not Core. That was something that happened because of Core's inaction and unwillingness to take a stand on a controversial issue. They just said, we want nothing to do with this. So I think Peter Todd threw his hands up, said no. Greg Maxwell said no. I don't think anyone was on board with that except Luke. And that was it. Luke, once he threw his weight behind it, suddenly we had a wild rogue client out there that's threatened to start, rejecting blocks that didn't activate SegWit, and it looked ridiculous, and it won. And that to me feels like exactly the same situation we're in here. I don't expect, or I like Core, and I appreciate the fact that it is efficient and it does have a sort of unpalatable amount of centralization there, but that is helpful to us. Like, we can leverage that to do good things. And it's, as I say, it's unpalatable, but it's just maybe if it went, I think we would all suddenly realize how much we miss it. So I don't feel like attacking Core devs and just, casting aspersions about compromise and all that. It's really useful in some ways that we actually have it, and it's been useful in the past. However, when it comes to things like activating soft forks, that you have the biggest mining manufacturer in the space, as well as the guy running the biggest pools, say, no, you're not having this upgrade. You're not having Lightning Network, at least in that way of doing it. The network has to stand up and say, fuck you, and do it anyway. And when Core go, that's a bit hot for us, we're not going to touch it. As long as you have spontaneous alternatives show up that go, all right, Core, don't worry, sit this one out. We'll make a rogue third party, a different client that pushes this thing through. And don't worry, like, you'll remain the reference implementation, or, sort of the de facto spec. Right. Like, so I think that's kind of what has to happen here is people will go, all right, Core aren't doing what we want them to do. It's too controversial for them. They're not going to do it. All right, let's move to something else. Everyone moves to knots, which is Core with updated spam filters and a few other defaults that are just a bit more aggressively, ideologically committed to things that, should, in my estimation, be how Bitcoin works for a node user. All right, but point is, everyone spontaneously moves off for a bit. Great. And then the network changes to reflect that. And then Core just sort of carries on doing what it does, carries on ticking over, and they carry on doing the sort of more less controversial housekeeping stuff that goes on there. And if they ever do something actively malicious, it's over. So another example was Taproot activation, right? It was kind of stagnating, endless bike shedding about how we're going to do this thing. a rogue client spontaneously pops up. That was me and Luke and Shinobi. And then that says we are activating Taproot. And right after that, Core released their activation client, which has the same parameters as we do, except, you know, with some critical differences. To me, that was the same thing again. And I think this is the spam wars is the same thing yet again. The only way it doesn't go down this time, the same way it went down with Taproot activation and SegWit, is just because community members are too ambivalent or Bitcoin's too big to really galvanize around things like this now. Or, you know, they've been sufficiently gaslit to the point where they just can't even understand that there's a problem right now. So hopefully we're countering all that.
In the eyes of Core, I'm just trying to like put myself in the room here. Like, you know, you do a risk analysis. You know, do we fix the filters for the bros or not? Right? You know, if we don't, what's the downside? We've already talked about that in at the beginning of the show. You know, it's just gonna you're spamming the Bitcoin blockchain for forever and ever more. That's a pretty bad downside, right? What's the downside of actually upgrading the filters? Like, what is the worst thing that can happen?
Well, yeah, it's just freeze. Like it's a deer in the headlights at the moment. That's all it is. It's not the deer going, do I stand here and get hit by the truck or do I move out of the way? It's not that. It's just like that's the current approach here. It's just I'm not doing anything here. Like you obviously have Bitcoin Core is broken at the moment because either you have to take an active position one way or the other. Data carrier size is meaningless at the moment, and it's still there, and it still has a default value that isn't working. You have this small door, right, that everyone is ignoring because there's a much bigger door that accidentally opened up, right? So it's like get rid of the door altogether because it isn't working, or make it work again. But you can't just have a thing that doesn't work. Like data carrier size is stupid now. It doesn't do anything, but it's still there and it's still being set. The filter people are saying make it work again. The anti-filter people are saying get rid of it altogether. Core will just do neither, which is actually how it worked before, which is okay, we have SegWit, we have all the activation logic in it, the miners aren't activating it, it's just going to time out after a year and a half and it's just gone. That was Core back in SegWit activation. And it took other people to say, all right, we're going to force through the activation of this thing. So it works the same way here. It's like we are going to make data carrier size work again. It's a little different, but Giacomo, you're about to jump in.
No, yeah, I just want to stillman again the position, remove data carrier size altogether. Again, I'm just pretending. I agree with mechanics that we should make it work again, but the position to remove it. So to answer Daniel's question about what is the cost of making data carrier size work again, as opposed to remove it completely, which is not what Core is doing. Core is leaving it there malfunctioning, which is crazy. But what is the cost of fixing it? Allegedly, the cost is pushing more. So, honestly speaking, off-band payment for block space inclusion is already a thing. Since years, actually, the transaction accelerators were always there. Some miners were letting you write messages pay in the Coinbase in 2015. So it was always there, but it was a niche phenomenon. Now it's becoming mainstream, again, independently from filters as is. And one of the theses that is that if we fix filters, we will push even more in this direction. This is, I think, it's kind of weak risk estimation because it assumes that this direction is, I mean, that we can slow it down meaningfully anyway, and is also doesn't take into consideration the second order effects that mechanics mentioned before, which is this kind of social dynamic in which if we make your stuff more expensive, then actually that's a disincentive to route around, not an incentive to route around because we're making it more expensive. So yeah, it's weak. Basically, the idea is kill the mempool. I can appreciate that there may be some the best still manning I can try to do is this: if we fix filter, we are kicking the can down the road about mitigation of this attack by miners, and we are releasing the tension over trying to solve a fundamental problem, which is miners sponsored by governments with a lot of money. They can either stop produce blocks or producing empty blocks, or so stop producing blocks is bad, but not so bad because at least the difficulty goes down. Producing only empty blocks is worse because we don't confirm on chain, and also the difficulty stays up. Producing 4 megabytes spam filled block is the worst scenario because now we don't get transactions, difficulty stays up, and our UTXO and block space in our node has to keep. We also spend money to sync, and we will have to spend this money to sync forever in the future. So this kind of attack is the worst kind of attack. A central bank can sponsor this kind of attack and can route around filters. So the best defense, the best criticism I could do to my position, just fix the filters, would be that maybe we can take this occasion to think hard, to think or just to test what we do in that situation. There are many game theoretical analyses, but if we are fucked because they can censor layer one forever, maybe it's better to know it now than rather than later, because maybe we have to basically, I don't know, do something even more drastic, or maybe transaction aggregation in the second layers will fix it, and then all the debate about covenants become almost as urgent as the covenant fanatics make it to be. So there is this argument, I think, which is not completely made up. Overall, if I had to weigh those, let's freaking fix the filter. I mean, just
Yeah, it's like I really like that you brought that up. I'll quickly go over that. Like or I'll reiterate it. If miners are making money doing stuff that goes against the interest of the network, we have to have some sort of defense for that. You cannot just sit there and say, "Hey, they're making money." So if you can save tens of millions of dollars a year, because your lawyers say comply with OFAC, and it will save us so much legal headache. Like this is over compliance is what everyone does anyway. Wherever Bitcoin interacts with the legacy financial system, there is always masses of red tape and compliance, and their lawyers will always say, do everything. Take your customers' DNA samples, take their hair follicles. You want to know the middle name of their great great grandma and all that stuff, because it might save you money when the IRS comes knocking or whether the SEC comes knocking. Like it's going to save you money, so I advise just doing it all. So they go way overboard. Or you get based companies like Bull Bitcoin that will do the minimum and just take on the headache of it and tell the regulators to go fuck themselves. But the point is, if you can save a bunch of money doing stuff, that's the same as making more money. You're making money doing something, and if you can make money by being OFAC compliant or filling the blocks with garbage instead of regular transactions, you have to have a defense against that. And like Giacomo said, it is the worst of all worlds. Like you have the biggest blocks imaginable right now. You have the least transactions imaginable because they're getting crowded out by all the spam. And the reason it's so the absolute worst thing about it is that it's perceived as if doing anything about it would be censorship and undermining to how Bitcoin works in the first place, when it was never a censorship resistant file storage system. It was never that. It was always a censorship resistant monetary network with a very hostile attitude towards the storage of generic files. And there was never a discussion around op return and all that stuff being censorship, because it isn't. It's never been like it's designed for this. We reject you doing that. Though if you can do that, we're going to try and minimize the extent to which you have a good time doing that, because we don't want you doing that. We want you doing this. That was always fine. And now miners are doing this, making money doing it. And it's akin to them mining just empty blocks, like Giacomo says, making the difficulty maintain, its height so you can't do anything about it. It's akin to big blockers making nodes have to download much more data and increasing the burden of cost on them. It's akin to small blocks making it so that we have to fight over very little space to get our transactions into the blockchain. And it's also a complete ruining of the culture, to the point where now when we want to do future soft fork upgrades and we require the consensus of as many participants in the Bitcoin community as possible, we have to contend with the fact that some people are using it for arbitrary data storage now, and anything that makes monetary use case more efficient is to their detriment. So naturally, even though they haven't figured it out yet, the spammers are against covenants. They have to be, because covenants increase your economic density, which increases the financial users' ability to compete with them for block space. So Lightning is bad news for spammers, because if I can do 2 transactions on the blockchain for $10 and I have to compete with spam, that sucks. If I can do 1 million transactions with those 2, because a bunch of them happened in, 999,998 of them happened inside Lightning, and there were 2 on-chain, I touched the on-chain, I touched chain twice, still only $10, but I did so much more economic activity that the justification for me spending $20 or $30 is now there, because I'm spending way less per transaction once you incorporate Lightning. So spammers are against Lightning. They have to be. If they're coherent and they're sensible, then they are. So we have to get their permission, and they're not going to grant it. So you have to be prepared to tell these people that they're not using Bitcoin for the intended use case. They're hacking their way around an accident. And ultimately, if that door gets closed, doesn't matter. You weren't here for the right purpose. You weren't using it for the right purpose, and you have no clout when it comes to, endorsing or rejecting an upgrade. So this was Peter Todd's rationale back when we were dismissing CTV from Jeremy Rubin. He said, you have to demonstrate that it's useful for all users, and you haven't done that. You can't merely make Bitcoin better for one group of users whilst it doesn't affect another group. That was his criteria. I find that ridiculous, but that was his criteria. I don't think Bitcoin's ever worked like that. SegWit was bad for a bunch of people in the Bitcoin community, and we said, "Fuck you, we're doing it anyway." So, ultimately, the game theory doesn't all magically align, and we don't all agree on everything. Nodes and node software and miners and pools and exchanges all have different priorities, and someone has to win in a contentious scenario. So, I don't even know how I started on this ramble, but that's my perspective here. Like, yeah,
That's the part where we disagree, even if we agree on filters, everything else. Like, I'm very scared of the, so I'm very comforted by the idea that time precedence will be the governance mechanism. Like, in case of contention, status quo will win. This for me seems like a guarantee that worst case scenario we keep Bitcoin as is, which is not perfect. And again, Mechanics is completely right about the density, economic density, lightning, covenants. I completely agree. And I want covenants and I want second layers with a lot of density, because that improves spam. But I know how Bitcoin is. Worst case scenario, status quo is this. While to me, the idea that a subset of Bitcoiners can force the others to change the rules, the probability of that happening for the good, I think it's, if not smaller, comparable to the probability of that happening for the bad. And I hate democracy, and there are not many ways to fix democracy by putting like hash rate as a vote coefficient, or number of nodes. Of course, that doesn't mean anything, or influence on Twitter. Even if right now, like with Segwit, we were the good guys. I'm happy that our influence forced the miners to have Segwit, because Segwit was good. And Taproot, I'm super fan of Taproot, and now I'm also super fan of Covenants, at least some of them. But better any of them than nothing. But the precedent really scares me. How longer we will be the good guys? How longer the changed Bitcoin movement will be to improve it for real? I still think it is. Covenants are an improvement. Taproot definitely was. Segwit was necessary at that moment, even if looking back, maybe, yeah. But anyway, quadratic Sigash was good. So how long that will be the case? So in general, to me, knowing that any group like miners, core, can have a veto power on consensus changes, that doesn't really feel bad to me, as compared to the opposite. Of course, the best scenario is all the good changes will get in, maybe using core power, and all the bad changes will not. That's the best case scenario. But since it seems very optimistic, I think that eventually I think in 10 years I will be a very strong ossificationist. Not right now, because right now I would really like covenants.
I would also really like cross-input signature
Me
aggregation.
too. Yeah, me too. Yeah, yeah.
I also want APO again, to be honest. I think I'm back in the APO camp.
I
And
consider that a covenant, basically. A pre-signed APO transaction is a form of covenant.
yeah, I think like to touch on covenants, it always comes up in these discussions. I'm just
And
like,
actually, 2 hours in, could you actually explain what covenants are to Lauren, as if she had just magically reappeared, just for the listeners and myself,
So
of course.
like
now I can tell. Daniel, I give you a Bitcoin and you can only spend if you prove something. If you prove that you have a key or some time has passed. So you prove something and you spend. But when you spend, there is no kind of encumbrance on how you spend it. So I put an encumbrance of can you spend? But if you can, now it's yours. Covenants just add uh, to some degree recursive, like step 2 and step 3 encumbrances. So it's like, even if you can spend, I limit the possibility for you to spend that. This seems like stupid or useless or very niche. But one thing I realized in the last years, I was not aware. I didn't understand this a few years ago when I heard about covenants, because people were talking about that in terms of security vaults. But that's kind of silly because anyway, anyway, the point is that with covenants you can do easier lightning channels that are easier multi-party. So instead of 2 you can have 100 people. That you can do that right now, but that's hard. With covenants you can make that easy, and also you can make them cold or non-interactive. I can open a channel with you, not going on chain, and only go on chain when I have to use it to pay you, but we don't have to create it in that moment. So I can say, Daniel, maybe over 100 years we will need to pay each other. I can create a channel that stays off chain, and it will only enter on chain when we actually need to route through that. So that these two things are very powerful for Lightning, and covenants can do that, even if this seems like a very abstract thing to do. But they are very important for scaling. And any prevout APO that Mechanics was mentioning is, I consider that a very simple form of covenant, which is also my favorite because it's very focused on what it has to do.
yeah, it's just one type of covenant, right? Where you already have, um, you know, uh, explain it for me because it's you're encumbering the spend condition with one type of covenant where
Yeah,
you
but also the kind of so in any prevout, what you do is I'm basically I'm blocking you from spending, but I pre-sign a transaction in which you can spend, but I encumber this pre-signed transaction and now I give it to you. So it requires some level of interactivity before, which is to some degree it is better. For example, for cycling attacks on Lightning, it's better to negotiate stuff before, but we can still do that off chain. So it's like a very weak form of covenant in a way, because it requires people to pre-sign and exchange stuff before the covenant is enacted. While stuff like CTV, it just I can just create a transaction myself, take the hash, put the hash of the templates in the CTV, and I can do it all myself. Well, any private requires some interactivity, which is less powerful, but maybe more safe in some
yeah.
scenarios.
Yeah, and it also you need the fact that you have to replicate the behavior of it with CTV and something else like checksig from stack, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
that that just adds a greater surface for things that can go wrong. Though people with a more nuanced understanding of how limited CTV is might disagree. At this moment, I have this embarrassingly untechnical, but nonetheless, screaming heuristic that just says every single person that is gaslighting over the spam approach that I advocate for is violently pro CTV, and I don't understand it because we are fighting the same battle. They want to increase economic density of people's on-chain footprint and thus price out the spam more efficiently. I find this to be an incredibly, wanting approach, and incredibly like the meme where someone like walks across a mat in the gym, abolish the state, while someone else is doing cartwheels and flying and in a wingsuit and all that stuff. Like, let's do anarcho-communism or something, right? Like, there's one way of doing it that's staring you in the face that for some reason everyone is against, and there's another way of maybe doing it that I'm very pessimistic about. I love covenants on paper, and in practice, just like I love lightning on paper, and in practice, I've watched lightning just get used in a custodial way by everyone that uses it, to the point where I'm wondering why they're even using it. They're paying, in some cases, more than they would on chain just because the merchant only accepts lightning or something like that. This is such a bastardization of what we were, hoping for with lightning, and it's distressing. Like, I tried to set my friend up yesterday. I spent hours with him yesterday setting up a lightning node. Like, I got him a start 9, and I used to work at start 9, and I worked there for the very simple reason that I want people to be able to run nodes, and therefore it needs to be easy, and the user experience has to be good enough that we have a hope in hell of people actually running nodes and using lightning in a sovereign way. Even that, just it took hours for someone that's already a decent Bitcoiner that knows pretty much, has no technical background, but knows, the language and knows the ethos, and it still takes hours. I'm like, okay, you've got to do 2 different backups, because you need to back up the mnemonic, and then you need to back up the channel state, and you need to do that every time you open the channel state. And now we need to find you a good peer, someone to open with. Oh, it didn't work, they rejected it. Oh, you don't have, they have a minimum channel size of 0.1 Bitcoin. That's $6,800 worth of Bitcoin you need to put into this thing you don't even understand yet to have a channel. Not realistic. All right, let's open up a channel with someone else. Oh, wait, they charge 0.01 sats per sat or something. That's going to be more expensive than on chain. If you buy a stake, it's going to cost you $5 worth of sats or something once you've paid it. That doesn't work either. All right. Now we need to connect your mobile wallet to the Lightning node. Oh, it only connects over Tor. That sucks. Let's use LND instead and use LNC. For that, you'll need to install Lightning Terminal, which sits on top of LND, and then you can use this beta feature called Lightning Node Connect, which you can use Zeus to connect to that. Like, they're like, this is a pretty high barrier to entry. Are you sure this is going to work? I'm like, yeah, obviously not. Everyone's just going to use Moon or Blink Wallet or Phoenix. That's how 99% of Lightning users operate. So, all that is to say, when covenants come around, and we're using all these unbelievably sophisticated protocols to make it so that people can minimize their on-chain footprint, my hope that anyone actually uses it like that is just so in the gutter at this point. Maybe you can offer me some hope here, Giacomo, because maybe the decreased degree of interactivity required with the covenants kinds of protocols like coin pools, maybe that offers a glimmer of hope here. Maybe it's just Lightning is particularly bad because of the interactivity. Shill me on it.
So Lightning is bad for basically 2 things. Right now, one of the things is just the limited number of parties. Coin pools can be multi-party, and that's great. And interactivity is the second reason. But I want to be a little bit. I think that an improve out and LNHance, let's say, will both fix the things. LNS also allows you to do more complex things like there are many other more complex protocols, and so the idea is if we just need non-interactive multi-party channels, and that's already something. But just to answer to your previous comments, I think that most of the things that we have to fix in Lightthings in order to have a better Lightning network without all this recourse to custodians and stuff has nothing to do with consensus changes. And I think that since it's very hard to fix Lightning and to improve Lightning, it's a very hard job, and it's thankless and it's boring and it's super fine technical. Like if you look at the Baltic on a Badger speech by Roy of Breeze Wallet about async payment, how to receive a Lightning payment when you are not online, which is a very important thing. One of the reasons I use Lightning mostly non-custodially with Phoenix or Breeze most of the time. I also use it with Zeus and my node. But every time I receive tips on Nostr, I just freaking use Albi because I
Right.
never had the time to. So one of the thing is is async payment, receive payment when your wallet is shut down. This is something that in Lightning is terrible. There is a way to fix it without any covenant or stuff. There's just a way to change Lightning in order to fix it, but it's hard and boring and long. So one of the problems is that yes, covenants will make all of this work easier, but there is the tendency to say, oh, since this is hard, let's change all the rules with covenants, and now it will become easier. But if we keep using this mentality, like if tomorrow we have any prove out, but nobody will build very, very complex, good UX for L2, any prove out is completely useless and doesn't fix lighting, and people will use custodians anyway. So we need, so I would say that like 90% is better UX. Consider, I have to send you money and you will give me an invoice that expires. No, you should give me an identifier of your wallet, which has nothing to do with the on-chain address, and then my wallet will try to pay you on Lightning. If it doesn't work, my wallet will actually open a channel on the flight with you, with the security assumption. So I also screw up the change heuristics, because I will spend entire UTXOs and give myself the change over Lightning. So this is a good wallet. We don't have this kind of good Lightning wallets, and moving the attention to covenants, it's fine because it's still early. Maybe we have to do something different, but there is a danger in that. The danger is that every time the protocol has limitation that you have to fight with a lot of UX work, instead of doing the boring UX work, you just try to bypass it by reinventing protocols and redesigning stuff at the lower level. So I think that so to answer to your question more directly, 90% of the problems will have to be fixed by better wallets, better infrastructure, better wallets. Covenants makes that easier, so I want them, but they will not fix it magically. After Covenants, we have to go back to build the covenant compliant LSP, covenant compliance wallets, and the logic will be completely different, and we are back to square zero, basically. Sorry, see that Leo is leaving. So I'm so sorry that we are so talkative mechanics. That
No, yeah, Leo's dropped away. No problem. He had to run.
Yeah, well, I appreciate all that. And it's true, and it's just about being realistic, right? You know, you've got to take into account adoption, and like there are people that make these sort of annoying paternalistic arguments of, well, when there's more Taproot adoption, we'll think about doing another upgrade. That sounds like really stupid, right? If you're a protocol dev, stuff like that makes you tear your hair out, but it's also kind of true, right? Like, how much Taproot is there? I still can't open simple Taproot channels with like a lot of people that I tried to open channels with. So, like, I mean, where's multi-sig, musig 2? Like, where are all these things? They're taking a while, and we should sort of use what we've got before we keep screwing around. And there's always that risk, right?
Yeah.
Of if there's an unintended consequence. Like, let's say this quickly, because I want to steal man covenants because I do like them. There's the initial concern that a lot of people had was the idea that you can force a restriction on people where everyone is only able to spend Bitcoin that the government says they can spend to a certain address. You know, the government's going to force everyone to start locking all their Bitcoin inside UTXOs that can only be spent to a government wallet or a government approved multisig or something like that. This was the original FUD around them, and it's just not valid because they can do that with multisig already. It's more efficient if they do, and they're not. And even if they didn't think of it until covenants, you know, it was always possible. It's not a real concern around it. So for me, the concern, and yeah, to point it out, like, you know, Reardon Code is like putting his face palming, saying, look, it's you that makes the condition. It's not the sender. So if you give someone a covenant encumbered, address, that is going to, if an exchange says you can't withdraw your Bitcoin until you give us an address that uses covenants, and the covenants have got to have this condition where you can only spend the money back to us or a government approved address, like, it's still on you to make that that address. You don't need to do it. So it's no less voluntary than a multi-sig. So some of the FUD around covenants has been nonsense. My concern is literally these two things. Everyone in favor of them is constantly gaslighting me around how spam mitigation would work, and that doesn't make any sense to me, and makes me very distrustful of the entire initiative behind it. And the second is unintended consequences. If checksig from stack, I believe, is maybe where the concern comes from here, rather than CTV, but just the yet another door with another arbitrary size that isn't controlled by data carrier size. My confidence that we would be able to do anything about that is very low at the moment because of how little success we've had fighting spam. So I don't really want to introduce another problem there that we have to deal with. And people go, oh, Taproot allowed this, Covenants allow it too. We never did anything about it with Taproot. That's the new precedent. I don't want that to become the dominant narrative because it's not accurate. As Giacomo outlined for ages, we've always done anti-spam stuff. We've always mitigated spam. And we need to do it with Taproot to demonstrate that we're going to continue doing that. There's a mistake and a bug around at the moment, and until that gets fixed, it becomes I'm very unwilling to do future soft fork upgrades because the mentality is not correct. And this is not a technical argument. It's a comment on a change in culture. But I think that's really important. I think all Bitcoin development is downstream of its culture. It has to be. And if the culture is screwed, then upgrades become way less palatable. Even if I agree with the technical reality of what the upgrade does, that might sound irrational, but I think it's a reasonable position.
Right. We're going to have to start winding this one down, guys, because this has been 2 hours and 15 minutes. But I still got
go.
So your analogy, I think of the door, it's just dawned on me. I think a great analogy would be because we had the what were they, the kitty ordinals, the kitty NFTs, like that Udi was shilling. So perhaps it's just like a ridiculously sized cat flap that's being put next to the door and allowing all of this
it's bigger
shit
than the
in.
door, so it's very unusual that the cat flap is bigger than the door itself.
Yes, exactly. So I want to see, is there an end in sight? Because one of the trailing narratives has always been these guys are going to run out of money and it's just degens on the blockchain. And when you look at the mempool and you look what's making it in the blocks, you do see spikes. At the moment, there's not so many. And shout out to Mempool Space for putting those goggles on the mempool on the website there, because you can see exactly what's going in. And I'm looking right now at the latest block. Yeah, there's a fair amount in there. But and current fees are 29 sats per VByte for that last block. In the mempool, you're waiting around 40 for the next block. Median, yeah. I mean, does it peter out? Does it just all go away?
No, that's been the COPE argument from the beginning, is that financial transactions will price out the spam. So this thing that isn't a problem is going to be fixed. I mean, it's a very inconsistent position. We shouldn't fix this thing, but it will be fixed because of, it's nonsense. It's just not true. There is more spam than there has ever been. So why anyone would think the trend will suddenly reverse again and spam will go away? Shitcoins are forever. Shitcoins on Bitcoin will keep iterating. Every individual scam will die, but there will always be another scam in its wake. Multiple other scams. Like there are more shitcoins than there've ever been. They just keep changing in nature. And doing this on Bitcoin, unfortunately, it hurts Bitcoin. It really hurts adoption because people are getting into Bitcoin and scams at the same time, all within the Bitcoin umbrella rather than the crypto umbrella. And, like I've said to you before, like separating crypto and Bitcoin was hard enough. Separating Bitcoin from tokens on top of Bitcoin that are called deceptive things like sats when they're not actually sats, like things like that is just, I've had too many conversations with strangers that say, oh, I got into Bitcoin, I got scammed and left. And I'm like, what? And then they bought, some scammy token instead of Bitcoin. Like, then I go, oh, you bought something in crypto, not Bitcoin. Like, just the fact that that's going to get even harder to differentiate now just is painful. And it really annoys me seeing Bitcoin Magazine try and muddy that water and blur that line. That is such a hard line to draw. To get into the global consciousness that Bitcoin and crypto are not the same thing. In fact, crypto reinvents the problem Bitcoin was designed to fix. The fact that you would blur that line is just disgraceful to me. It's the most sickening element of all this.
And if you analogize that to fiat world, I mean, you look at fiat world, that the bad actors own the main propaganda outlets like the newspapers and whatever else. So
yeah, right. Yeah, Bitcoin
know?
Magazine on all the media. I know, and they want to host a lot of the debates on it, but everyone that works there is just absolutely shamelessly pushing this stuff. The only person I haven't like just totally lost it with and blocked and never wanted to interact with again is Pete Rizzo, because I don't know, I think I just like the guy too much. But you know, I think we're due to have a discussion, right? Hosted
I
by
think
you.
you will like his last thread on Twitter just now.
Yeah, I saw all that. He's celebrating Luke, which is great because he's a historian as well, and he's got more notes on various Bitcoin historical things than anyone else. I've seen him sit there, write them down, interviewing James Hilliard about BIP 91 and things like that. So I like the guy a lot. I disagreed with, you know, he went on Peter McCormack's podcast and made a bunch of Brian Armstrong style arguments about how if you increase what Bitcoin's chain is used for, you increase the people coming into the community, and naturally that will manifest as just there being more Bitcoiners. I don't like this argument for obvious reasons. They just get burnt by buying a rare frog and then they never come back to Bitcoin again, or they do, but way later than they would have.
Yeah.
But I mean, that wasn't the sum total of his arguments. But yeah, I don't. Yeah, like I say, Princey, we're supposed to have a debate, right? And you're going to be there.
Yeah, hopefully, mate, we'll get that up on Spaces. Nicholas Safford from New Layer Capital is trying to get that together. So yeah, I'm down for it. Always happy to have these open conversations because you get to learn so much, and I hope that many people listening to this, and if they haven't heard our Spaces from before Mechanic, they should go back and listen to that. And any of Giacomo, I know you've been on Canut's show as well, talking about this, as have you, Mechanic. And you've been on Pete's show. There's so much to learn, and yeah, at the end of the day, I think the node runners will end up stepping up, and there is a way for people to do that now, and that's all on WTF happened in February 2023. But I got to throw each of you the last question. If you had one last orange pill left to give to somebody, who would you give that to, and why?
Bitcoin Magazine.
That was good. That was good. Yeah, you give it to David, so that fix
David Bailey. Yeah.
Oh, very good.
That's very hard. Let's
And
say
now,
that.
now, of course, Giacomo is going to go philosophical on our asses, Mechanic. Like,
Now I will try to be very practical. I mean, I don't love the guys completely, but for me, the shitcoin parabola of Elon Musk was very disappointing. Having in this moment in time, having Elon Musk as part of the Bitcoin crew will be actually interesting. We don't need a messiah. Bitcoin doesn't need Musk, like it doesn't need Saylor or Bukele, but it would be cool to have Elon Musk. I mean, imagine a state and a head of nation like Bukele plus the billionaire, or let's do something even better. I want to heavily orange pill Jeff Bezos that will take over the role of cool billionaire from Elon Musk. That would be even finer.
Excellent. All right, guys, thank you so much for giving up so much time, not just on this podcast, but everything else that you do. It was great to see you both in person at Bitcoin Atlantis. Big shout out to the guys there that organized an incredible conference. Do you guys need to shill anything? Please, take the time to talk about projects, where you're going to be, what you're going to be doing, and what you'd like the plebs to hear.
Yeah, put your hash rate where your mouth is. Mine with Ocean, and choose one of the 2 anti-spam templates. And when you'll be able to get Lightning payments, but make sure you have CLN because they're going to be using Bolt 12 because that's the way we maintain verification of the fact that we've paid people because our pool is transparent and everything is verifiable. So in that effort, we have to use Bolt 12, which isn't widely supported yet, but it's the most cool possible way to receive payments. You don't even need to make an account with the pool. You can just sign a message. And there are a lot of signing mechanisms out there now, thankfully, with SegWit addresses. Even Taproot addresses can be used to sign, I think. It's just BIP 322 isn't finished yet. going way off on a tangent here. Mining with Ocean is great fun.
Yeah.
It's
Just
permissionless, and you're going to be paid out of a Taproot.
Point your hash
or-
rate at Ocean. You should have just stopped right there. But like,
Yeah.
can I
Yeah, Ocean
can I
XYZ.
point? Do you need my nerd miner hashing? Like, do you
I
need to?
actively want you not to mine with nerd miners because they just cannot find blocks.
Of course
and all
not,
they do
but-
is just drain pool infrastructure for no reason. They're the worst. BitAxe is
There's
great.
so much fun
BitAxe
though.
is
They're
worth doing.
great. They're great little pieces of equipment. It's got my son asking all kinds of questions about mining, which is a great thing.
Well, just
Great
point
addition.
at our test net infrastructure then, because they can't do anything like get a BitAxe. Like shout out to
BitAxe,
Scott.
yeah.
Scott
All right,
9000
next.
BitAxe.
That's our next one. A BitAxe. All right, Giacomo, what you
I
up to?
subscribe to Mechanics Shield, of course, Ocean. I'm also a very, very small part of this venture. But I can shield PlanB.network, PlanB network. The idea is to put together a great epicenter of Bitcoin education, open source free education, and paid professional education, together with a federation of physical places, which reminds a little bit of the old idea of the Bitcoin embassies around the world. So a federation of physical places where we can have startup incubators, office space, stuff like that, plus a federation of educational resources. You can go on planb.network now. It's still young. We made the website in November. We announced it in October and it was ready basically in December. So it's still pretty early, but we are improving a lot together with people from the Vancouver Bitcoin and people from Summer of Bitcoin and people from many independent nodes like the Amity Age Center in Honduras or like the Pleb Labs in Austin or like all these great people running these local nodes are part of this. And I'm super it's since mechanics was very talkative, I will also steal another minute. When I was having my own research laboratory in Milan for 4 years, it was great. It was like a great thing to have. Then I closed it down in 2018 to become a freelance, a little bit more sabbatical. I had a lot of relax and quality time with my family, but I was missing one single idea to shield, one project to shield. So Plan B Network is something I really want to succeed and to be a great addition to Bitcoin. The point of it is not really to reinvent the wheel. Many people are doing great education. The point is just to aggregate, federate, and sort in a logical way what is already existing out there.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for coming on, and I look forward to seeing you again soon, both in person somewhere. See you later.
See you.